The taste of copper still fills my mouth when I remember that October night in 1987. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, former quantum physicist at the Brookhaven National Laboratory, current survivor of humanity's first contact with the warp. The screaming never stopped echoing in my head, not from the victims, but from reality itself as it tore apart like wet paper. You think that makes me insane, but you don't know what I've seen crawling through the spaces between atoms. They called it the Philadelphia Experiment's bastard child. Our attempt to create a stable interdimensional gateway using Cold War technology and desperation. What we opened instead was a wound in the universe that bled nightmares for 37 days before we managed to seal it. 37 days that changed everything. The governments buried it, labeled us all mentally unstable, but the truth gnaws at reality's edges still. This is my testimony before the darkness takes me too. Chapter 1. The Manhattan Project's shadow. The fluorescent lights in Laboratory Complex B7 hummed with the same mechanical persistence that had marked my days for the past 3 years. October 15th, 1987, started like any other Wednesday. Reagan was still president. The Berlin Wall still divided a world locked in Cold War paranoia, and most of humanity remained blissfully unaware that we were about to punch a hole through the fabric of reality itself. I remember the taste of stale coffee and cigarette smoke that permeated everything in those days. Dr. Marcus Webb, our project director, stood before the assembled team with his characteristic nervous energy, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he prepared to deliver what we all knew would be either our greatest triumph or our final briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb began, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades spent in government black sites, "Project Erebus has received final authorization from the Pentagon. We go live in 72 hours. The room fell silent, except for the ever-present hum of machinery. 16 of the brightest minds in theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and electromagnetic field manipulation sat around that conference table, each of us carrying security clearances that could have us disappeared without a trace. We were the inheritors of Einstein's work, the children of Manhattan Project scientists who had learned to split atoms and now sought to split dimensions. Dr. Elizabeth Kowalski, our team's specialist in exotic matter research, was the first to break the silence. Her Polish accent, thick despite 20 years in America, carried a tremor I'd never heard before. "Marcus, the containment field calculations still show variance in the 7th decimal place. If we're wrong about the stability coefficient..." "We're not wrong," Webb interrupted, but I caught the slight twitch in his left eye that betrayed his uncertainty. "The computer models have been verified 12 times. The exotic matter injection system is calibrated to precise specifications. We have accounted for every variable, but had we?" I stared down at the classified documentation spread before me, pages of equations that described forces humanity had never directly encountered. Mathematical models built on theories that existed only in the fevered dreams of physicists who dared to imagine what lay beyond the veil of conventional spacetime. The genesis of Project Erebus traced back to 1943, to the legendary Philadelphia experiment that had supposedly made the USS Eldridge disappear from one harbor and reappear in another. Official records denied it ever happened, but whispered stories persisted in the halls of the Pentagon and the laboratories of the Atomic Energy Commission. Stories of sailors fused with steel bulkheads, of men driven mad by glimpses of realities that should not exist, of a technology so dangerous it had been buried beneath layers of classification that would make the atomic bomb seem like a firecracker. But the Cold War had a way of resurrecting dangerous ideas. When Soviet scientists began publishing papers on theoretical dimensional manipulation in 1979, the United States military-industrial complex responded with characteristic paranoia and determination. If the Russians were trying to punch holes in reality, then by God, we would punch bigger holes first. The Brookhaven facility had been chosen for its isolation and its already extensive network of particle accelerators. To the outside world, we were conducting routine experiments in high-energy physics. In reality, we were attempting to create a stable gateway to what the classified documents euphemistically termed alternative spatial dimensions. Dr. James Morrison, our electromagnetic field specialist, raised his hand like a school child. At 63, Morrison was old enough to have worked on the original atomic bomb project, and the radiation scars on his hands served as permanent reminders of science's capacity for unintended consequences. "I need to voice my concerns one more time," Morrison said, his gravelly voice carrying the authority of experience. "The energy requirements for dimensional breach are unprecedented. We're talking about creating a localized space-time distortion using technology that barely existed 10 years ago. The feedback potential alone could level half of Long Island." Webb's response was swift and bureaucratic. "Your concerns have been noted and addressed, James. The containment protocols are specifically designed to handle energy discharges of up to 10,000 terawatts. The fail-safe systems include automatic shutdown triggers at multiple stages of the process." What Webb didn't mention, what none of us dared to speak aloud, was that our understanding of dimensional physics was largely theoretical. We were building a machine to open doorways to places we had never been, using principles we had never tested, guided by mathematics that described realities we could barely imagine. I found myself thinking about my daughter Amy, safe in her dorm room at Columbia University, studying art history and complaining about her boyfriend in letters that arrived every Tuesday. She existed in a world where the greatest threat to humanity was nuclear war, a clean, comprehensible form of annihilation that at least obeyed the known laws of physics. What would she think if she knew her mother was about to attempt something that made hydrogen bombs look like toys? The technical specifications for the Erebus device filled 17 binders, each one stamped with security classifications that could send a man to federal prison for life. At its core, the machine was deceptively simple: a massive electromagnetic field generator designed to create a localized distortion in space-time by injecting exotic matter into a carefully controlled quantum vacuum state. The exotic matter itself was perhaps our greatest achievement and our most terrible mistake. Dr. Kowalski had spent 3 years perfecting the synthesis process, creating particles that possess negative mass energy density, matter that pushed space-time apart rather than pulling it together like normal matter. It was beautiful in its mathematical elegance and horrifying in its implications. The targeting system is locked onto dimensional coordinates 7.334 by 12.891 by negative 4.007, reported Dr. Susan Martinez, our quantum navigation specialist. The coordinates themselves were meaningless to anyone outside our team. Abstract numbers that supposedly described a location in a reality parallel to our own, a place where the laws of physics might be slightly different, but still comprehensible to human understanding. How wrong we were. As the meeting concluded and we filed out of the conference room, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Webb standing alone by the window, staring out at the autumn landscape of Long Island. The trees were turning gold and red, painting the world in colors that seemed almost artificial in their beauty. In 72 hours, we would attempt to reach beyond that world into something else entirely. I wanted to ask him if he truly believed we were ready, if the nightmares that had been plaguing all of us lately meant something, if the strange electromagnetic anomalies we'd been detecting in the weeks leading up to the test were harbingers of something we should fear rather than embrace. Instead, I gathered my classified documents and headed home to spend what might be my last normal evening with my husband David, watching the news and pretending that the most dangerous thing in our world was the possibility of nuclear war between superpowers who at least shared the same reality. That night, I dreamed of doors opening onto infinite darkness and voices that spoke in languages that predated human speech. I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth and the absolute certainty that we were about to make a mistake that would echo through eternity. But morning came, and with it, the inexorable momentum of government project schedules, security protocols, and the hubris of scientists who believed they could control forces they had never encountered. In 69 hours, Project Erebus would go live, and humanity would learn that some doors should never be opened. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were attempting to breach the barriers between dimensions in the same decade that had given birth to personal computers, MTV, and the Space Shuttle program. We were a species that had barely learned to split atoms, and yet we presumed to split reality itself. As I drove to work that Thursday morning, listening to radio reports about the stock market crash that had shaken the world just days earlier, I wondered if the universe was trying to send us a message about the dangers of reaching too far, too fast. The Black Monday crash had been blamed on computer trading programs that had spiraled out of human control, algorithms that had made decisions too quickly for human comprehension. What we were about to attempt made those computer programs look like children's toys. Chapter 2: Strange Frequencies. The first signs that something was wrong appeared exactly 48 hours before Project Erebus was scheduled to go live. I was calibrating the quantum field harmonics when Dr. Martinez burst into the laboratory with data readouts that would have been impossible under any known laws of physics. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately," she said, her usually composed demeanor cracked by something that looked dangerously close to panic. The readouts showed electromagnetic signatures that shouldn't exist, wavelengths that registered on our instruments but corresponded to no known form of energy. The frequency patterns were unlike anything in the scientific literature. They pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost organic, as if the universe itself had developed a heartbeat. Worse still, the signals were growing stronger as we continued our preliminary tests, as if our preparations for dimensional breach were somehow calling to something on the other side. Dr. Webb arrived within minutes of Martinez's discovery, his face pale beneath the fluorescent laboratory lighting. He studied the readouts with the desperate intensity of a man watching his life's work transform into his worst nightmare. "Run a diagnostic on all detection equipment," he ordered, but we all knew the instruments were functioning perfectly. These signals were real, and they were coming from somewhere that existed outside our understanding of reality. Dr. Morrison joined us in the main laboratory, moving with the careful gait of a man whose body had been ravaged by decades of exposure to experimental radiation. His scarred hands trembled slightly as he examined the data, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. "These frequency patterns, they're not random," he said, tracing the wave-like formations with his finger. "There's intelligence behind them. Something is responding to our tests." The implications hit me like a physical blow. We had assumed that our target dimension would be empty, or at best populated by forms of matter and energy that obeyed physics similar to our own. The possibility that we might be attempting to open a door into a realm inhabited by entities capable of responding to our activities had never been seriously considered. Dr. Kowalski arrived from the exotic matter synthesis laboratory with news that made our situation even more dire. "The containment fields are showing fluctuations," she reported, her Polish accent thickening with stress. "The exotic matter is becoming unstable, as if it's being influenced by some external force. The exotic matter was the key to the entire project. Without it, the Erebus device would be nothing more than an enormously expensive electromagnet. If the containment fields failed before we could complete the dimensional breach, the resulting explosion would make the Chernobyl disaster look like a minor industrial accident. But the alternative, proceeding with a test when we had clear evidence of unknown intelligence on the other side, was equally terrifying. We were preparing to punch a hole between realities, and something was already trying to communicate with us from the other side. Webb called an emergency meeting for 1400 hours. The 16 members of the Erebus team gathered in the secure conference room, each of us carrying the weight of knowledge that could reshape human understanding of the universe or end human civilization entirely. "The Pentagon has been briefed on our anomalous readings," Webb began, his voice carrying the flat tone of a man delivering news he wished he didn't have to share. Their response was unequivocal. "Project Erebus will proceed as scheduled." Dr. Martinez was the first to protest. "Marcus, you can't be serious. We have clear evidence of intelligent response from the target dimension. We don't know what we're opening a door to." "The decision has been made at levels far above our authority," Webb replied, The Soviet Union launched their own dimensional research program 6 months ago. Intelligence reports suggest they're planning their own breakthrough attempt within the next 90 days. The United States cannot afford to fall behind in what the Joint Chiefs are calling the dimensional arms race. The room erupted in heated discussion. Voices rose as 16 brilliant minds grappled with the possibility that national security imperatives were driving us toward a catastrophe that could make nuclear war seem manageable by comparison. Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Has anyone considered that these signals might be a warning? That whatever intelligence exists on the other side might be trying to tell us not to proceed? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. None of us had an answer, because none of us truly understood what we were dealing with. We were children playing with matches in a universe full of gasoline. I spent the next 6 hours reviewing every piece of data we had collected, searching for some pattern or clue that might explain the nature of the intelligence we had encountered. The frequency patterns were hauntingly beautiful in their complexity, mathematical structures that seemed to follow rules we had never discovered. But there was something else buried in the data. Subliminal harmonics that registered on the very edge of our detection capabilities. When I isolated these frequencies and ran them through our audio processing equipment, the results made my blood turn to ice. The sounds were almost musical, but wrong in ways that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. They reminded me of human voices, but stretched and distorted, as if they were being transmitted across impossible distances or through mediums that didn't exist in our reality. Dr. Kowalski found me in the audio laboratory at 0300 hours, staring at waveform displays that showed patterns no earthly intelligence could have created. Her presence was a relief. I had begun to fear that prolonged exposure to these alien harmonics might be affecting my sanity. "You heard them too," she said, not asking, but stating a fact she had already deduced from my expression. "They're trying to communicate," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't think they're using any form of language we would recognize. This is something deeper, direct transmission of concepts or emotions." "What are they trying to tell us?" I looked at the waveform displays, at patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly, at frequencies that registered on our instruments, but felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. "I think they're screaming," I said. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of emergency consultations, revised calculations, and increasingly desperate attempts to convince Webb and his Pentagon supervisors that Project Erebus should be postponed indefinitely. But the momentum of government bureaucracy and Cold War paranoia proved unstoppable. Additional security personnel arrived at the facility, men in dark suits who carried firearms and authority that extended beyond any normal chain of command. They established a perimeter around Laboratory Complex B7 and made it clear that no member of the Erebus team would be leaving until the project was completed. We were prisoners of our own discovery, hostages to forces we had unleashed but could not control. Dr. Martinez made one final attempt to reach sanity. She cornered Webb in his office and presented him with a complete analysis of the alien frequency patterns, mathematical proof that we were dealing with an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. Webb's response was to hand her a document stamped with classifications so high that reading it unauthorized could result in immediate execution. The document outlined the Soviet dimensional research program in terrifying detail, experiments that had already resulted in the disappearance of an entire research facility in Siberia, leaving only a crater filled with matter that didn't exist according to any known periodic table. "The Russians are 12 hours away from their own breakthrough attempt," Webb told Martinez. "If we don't proceed now, we hand them an advantage that could end the Cold War in their favor. The president himself has authorized this operation." But I knew, with the absolute certainty that comes from looking into the abyss and seeing it stare back, that the Cold War was about to become irrelevant. The frequency patterns we had detected carried harmonics that spoke of realities where concepts like nation-states and nuclear deterrence were as meaningless as sandcastles before a tsunami. In 18 hours, Project Erebus would go live, and we would discover what lay beyond the veil of conventional reality. The alien voices were still screaming their warnings across the dimensional barrier, but we had already committed ourselves to breaking down the door. I called my daughter that evening, using the secure communication system to reach her dorm room at Columbia. I told her I loved her, that I was proud of her, that whatever happened in the coming days, she should remember that her mother had tried to stop something terrible from occurring. "Mum, you're scaring me," Amy said, her young voice carrying across the distance between us. "What's wrong? What's happening?" "Just promise me you'll be strong," I replied, watching through the laboratory windows as technicians made final preparations for humanity's first intentional breach of dimensional barriers. "Promise me you'll survive whatever comes next." After I hung up, I returned to the audio laboratory and listened once more to the alien frequencies that had been growing stronger with each passing hour. The screaming had been joined by other sounds, rhythmic pulsing that reminded me of massive hearts beating, harmonics that suggested the movement of things too large to comprehend, whispers in languages that predated human speech. Something was coming. The question was whether we would be ready to meet it, or if our species was about to learn what it felt like to be prey in a universe full of predators we had never imagined. Chapter 3. The Breach Protocol. October 18th, 1987. 0600 hours. The day humanity lost its innocence. I arrived at Laboratory Complex B7 to find the entire facility transformed into something resembling a military command center. Additional personnel had arrived overnight. Physicists from Los Alamos, electromagnetic specialists from MIT, and men in military uniforms whose insignia I didn't recognize. The security perimeter had been expanded to include a 5-mile radius around the facility, with roadblocks manned by soldiers who looked like they expected to repel an invasion. Perhaps they were wiser than they knew. The Erebus device dominated the central laboratory like a technological cathedral. Standing 40 feet tall and spanning nearly 100 feet in diameter, it resembled a massive ring of exotic metals and crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them in impossible ways. The electromagnetic field generators hummed with barely contained energy, producing a subsonic vibration that I could feel in my bones. Dr. Webb stood at the primary control console, his face haggard from 72 hours of continuous work. The alien frequency patterns had continued throughout the night, growing stronger and more complex with each passing hour. Our instruments now detected signals across 17 different dimensional coordinates, as if our preparations had attracted the attention of multiple intelligences existing in parallel realities. "Status report," Webb demanded, as the senior team members assembled around the central control station. Dr. Kowalski was the first to respond. "Exotic matter synthesis is complete. We have sufficient quantities for a sustained dimensional breach lasting up to 6 hours. Containment field integrity is holding at 97.3%, despite the external interference patterns." Dr. Morrison looked up from his electromagnetic field monitoring station. "Field generators are operating within normal parameters, but we're detecting some unusual harmonics in the subspace frequency range. Whatever's on the other side appears to be generating its own electromagnetic fields." The implications were staggering. We were preparing to open a doorway to a dimension where the laws of physics might be fundamentally different from our own. The alien electromagnetic signatures suggested technology far beyond human capability, or perhaps natural phenomena that could manipulate forces we barely understood. Dr. Martinez delivered the most troubling news. "I've been analyzing the communication patterns we've been receiving. The mathematical structures have increased in complexity by a factor of 12 over the past 24 hours. Either we're dealing with multiple intelligence sources, or a single intelligence is rapidly learning how to communicate more effectively with our detection equipment." The idea that something was learning about us as we prepared to breach the dimensional barrier sent ice through my veins. We were about to open a door, but we had no idea what might be waiting on the other side, or how much it already knew about us. General Patricia Harrison arrived at 0800 hours with a convoy of military vehicles that turned our scientific facility into an armed camp. Harrison was a legend in Pentagon circles, a woman who had risen through the ranks by making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. Her presence meant that Project Erebus had reached the highest levels of government attention. "Dr. Webb," General Harrison said as she strode into the central laboratory, her polished boots clicking against the concrete floor. "I need a complete briefing on your anomalous contact phenomena. The Joint Chiefs are concerned about the intelligence implications." Webb led Harrison to a secure briefing room where our most classified data was displayed on screens that required special clearance to observe. I was included in the briefing as the team's expert on the alien frequency analysis, a role I had never wanted and desperately wished I could abandon. "What you're about to see represents first contact with intelligence from outside our dimensional reality," Webb began, activating displays that showed the complex mathematical patterns we had been receiving. "These signals demonstrate sophisticated understanding of quantum mechanics, electromagnetic theory, and dimensional physics that exceeds our current scientific knowledge." General Harrison studied the data with the focused intensity of a career military officer, confronting an enemy she had never encountered. "Are we dealing with a potential threat?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. None of us had an answer, because we were operating entirely outside human experience. We were about to make contact with entities whose nature, intentions, and capabilities were complete mysteries. "General," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that was eating at my insides. "Based on the frequency patterns we've analyzed, I believe we're dealing with intelligence that views reality from a fundamentally different perspective than our own. The communication attempts could be warnings, threats, or something else entirely that we lack the conceptual framework to understand." Harrison's response was swift and military in its logic. "Dr. Chen, the Soviet Union is proceeding with their own dimensional breach experiment in exactly 8 hours. Regardless of the potential risks, the United States cannot allow the Russians to gain a strategic advantage in dimensional technology. Project Erebus will proceed as scheduled." The final preparations began at 1,000 hours. The exotic matter injection systems were brought online, filling the laboratory with a subsonic hum that seemed to resonate in frequencies that existed below the range of human hearing. The electromagnetic field generators began their startup sequence, creating distortions in local space-time that made the air itself shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. I found myself assigned to the primary monitoring station, responsible for tracking the dimensional breach parameters and maintaining communication with whatever intelligence we encountered on the other side. It was a position that placed me at the center of humanity's first intentional contact with entities from beyond our reality. The alien frequency patterns intensified as our equipment reached full operational capacity. The mathematical structures became increasingly complex, evolving in real time as if the intelligence on the other side was adapting its communication methods to match our technological capabilities. At 1200 hours, we detected something that changed everything. "Webb, get over here immediately," Dr. Martinez called from her quantum navigation station. "I'm reading massive spatial distortions at the target coordinates. Something is moving on the other side." The readings were unlike anything in our theoretical models. Space-time itself appeared to be writhing at the target location, as if vast forces were manipulating the fundamental structure of reality. The alien frequency patterns had transformed into what could only be described as a countdown sequence, mathematical progressions that pointed toward a specific moment in time. Our moment. "They know," Dr. Kowalski whispered, staring at data displays that showed intelligence networks spanning multiple dimensional coordinates. "Whatever's on the other side, they know exactly when we're planning to open the breach." General Harrison stood at the central command console, her expression unreadable as she processed the implications of our discovery. We were not initiating first contact. We were responding to an invitation that had been carefully orchestrated by entities whose understanding of dimensional physics far exceeded our own. "How long until breach initiation?" she asked. Webb checked the mission chronometer. 18 minutes, 37 seconds until we reach the optimal space-time configuration for dimensional penetration. I stared at the frequency analysis displays, watching patterns that seemed to pulse with anticipation. The alien intelligence had been preparing for this moment, learning about us as we prepared to breach the barrier between realities. We were walking into a situation that had been designed by entities whose motives remained completely unknown. The exotic matter injection sequence began at T-15 minutes. Particles with negative mass energy density flooded the containment chambers, creating localized distortions in space-time that made reality itself seem unstable. The air in the laboratory took on a quality I had never experienced. It felt thick, charged with potential energy that made every breath taste of copper and ozone. At T-10 minutes, our instruments detected the first signs of dimensional weakness at the target coordinates. Space-time was beginning to thin, like fabric being stretched to its breaking point. The alien frequency patterns reached crescendo intensity, mathematical structures so complex that our computers struggled to process them. Field generators at maximum power, Morrison reported. Electromagnetic confinement holding steady. We're approaching the threshold for dimensional breach. At T-5 minutes, reality began to come apart. The air in the central laboratory started to shimmer with colors that had no names, frequencies of light that existed outside the visible spectrum but somehow remained visible to human eyes. The subsonic vibrations from the Erebus device intensified until the concrete floor beneath our feet began to crack, unable to contain forces that operated according to principles we barely understood. The alien frequency patterns suddenly stopped. The silence was more terrifying than any sound we had heard. After days of constant communication attempts from the other side, the sudden absence of signals felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when nature itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation of catastrophe. T-60 seconds, Webb announced, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. All personnel to breach stations, dimensional penetration in 60, 59, 58. I gripped the edges of my monitoring console as reality prepared to crack open like an egg. Through the reinforced observation windows, I could see the Erebus device beginning to glow with energy that existed in dimensions our eyes were never meant to perceive. 30 seconds, 29, 28. The taste of copper flooded my mouth. The air itself began to scream. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At exactly 13:47 hours Eastern Standard Time on October 18, 1987, humanity ripped a hole in the universe and learned that we were not alone. The breach opened like a wound in the air itself, a circular distortion 6 feet in diameter that showed not the empty dimension we had expected, but something that defied every law of physics we thought we understood. Through the opening, we glimpsed a reality painted in colors that hurt to perceive, where massive structures that might have been cities or machines or living things moved according to geometries that made no sense to minds evolved in three-dimensional space. And then we saw them. The entities on the other side had been waiting. Chapter 4. Through the Veil of Reality. The first thing to emerge from the dimensional breach was not matter or energy, but sound, a cacophony that existed in frequencies both above and below human hearing, yet somehow remained audible in ways that bypassed our ears and spoke directly to the primitive fear centers of our brains. It was the sound of vast machinery grinding through realities, of minds so alien that their thoughts themselves warped space-time. I watched in horrified fascination as the 6-foot circular breach began to expand, growing larger with each passing second despite our containment protocols. The electromagnetic field generators screamed in protest, their exotic metal components beginning to glow cherry red as they struggled to maintain some semblance of control over forces that operated according to principles we had never imagined. "Containment field failure in progress," Dr. Morrison shouted over the growing cacophony. "The breach is self-sustaining. The entities on the other side are feeding it energy." Through the expanding portal, we could see movement that defied description. Things that might have been structures or vehicles or living beings shifted through spaces that folded in on themselves like impossible origami. The very act of observation seemed to cause pain. Not physical pain, but a deeper ache that reached into the core of human consciousness and whispered that we were looking upon things our minds were never meant to perceive. Dr. Kowalski was the first to recognize the true horror of our situation. The exotic matter is being drawn through the breach, she reported, her voice rising with panic. They're learning how to manipulate our containment systems from the other side. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The exotic matter we had created to punch through dimensional barriers was now being studied and replicated by entities whose understanding of physics made our greatest achievements look like children's drawings. We had given them the key to our reality, and they were using it to expand the doorway we had inadvertently opened. General Harrison stood at the central command console, her military training warring with the absolute impossibility of what she was witnessing. Dr. Webb, initiate emergency shutdown procedures immediately. Webb's hands flew over the control systems, inputting shutdown commands that should have sealed the dimensional breach within seconds. Instead, the portal continued to expand, now measuring nearly 10 feet in diameter and growing larger with each passing moment. Shutdown protocols are not responding, Webb reported, his voice cracking with strain. The entities on the other side have somehow interfaced with our control systems. They're overriding our commands. Through the breach, we caught our first clear glimpse of the intelligence we had contacted. It defied every assumption we had made about alien life. The entities were not biological in any sense we understood. They appeared to be constructs of pure thought, given form through mastery of forces that existed beyond our dimensional framework. They moved through space that folded and twisted like liquid geometry, their forms shifting between states of matter and energy with fluid ease. But it was their attention that truly terrified us. We could feel it like a weight pressing down on our minds. Vast intelligences focusing on our small laboratory with the intensity of predators studying prey. They were learning about us at a rate that made our computers look slow by comparison, absorbing information about human psychology, technology, and social structure through methods we couldn't begin to comprehend. The first physical manifestation began at 1352 hours. A tendril of matter that existed in too many dimensions extended through the breach, reaching into our reality with the deliberate purpose of a surgeon making an incision. It touched one of the monitoring stations, and the entire console dissolved. Its atoms reorganized into patterns that served functions we couldn't guess. "Evacuation order," General Harrison commanded. "All non-essential personnel to the emergency bunkers immediately." But even as the evacuation alarm sounded, we knew it was already too late. The entities were not invading our reality. They were remaking it, transforming the fundamental laws of physics in the area around the breach to better suit their incomprehensible purposes. Dr. Martinez was monitoring the quantum navigation systems when the transformation reached her station. I watched in horror as the space around her began to twist, folding inward until she existed in a pocket of reality where up and down had lost all meaning. She screamed, but the sound came from directions that didn't exist, echoing through dimensional spaces our ears were never meant to detect. "Sarah, help me!" she cried, her voice Dopplering through frequencies that made my teeth ache. But there was nothing any of us could do. She was trapped in a bubble of alien physics, slowly being translated into something our universe could no longer contain. The entities were studying her, learning about human biology and consciousness by subjecting her to transformations that revealed the fundamental structures of terrestrial life. We could see her changing, becoming something that retained her memories and personality while existing according to principles that made no sense to minds evolved in three-dimensional space. Dr. Kowalski made a desperate attempt to reach the emergency containment controls, but the space around the breach had become a maze of folded reality where straight lines curved back on themselves and distance had become a negotiable concept. She took a single step forward and found herself falling upward through air that had gained the consistency of thick honey. The alien intelligences were everywhere now, their attention pressed against our minds like fingers exploring the inside of a closed box. I could feel them examining my thoughts, learning about human concepts of fear, love, hope, and despair with the clinical detachment of scientists studying laboratory specimens. But there was something else in that alien attention. A quality that might have been sympathy or regret, or perhaps just curiosity about how humans would react when faced with the absolute insignificance of their species in the larger cosmic order. Webb was still fighting to regain control of the Erebus device, his hands bleeding from desperate manipulation of controls that had begun to reshape themselves according to alien design principles. "If we can destabilize the exotic matter injection system," he shouted over the growing cacophony, "we might be able to collapse the breach." I knew he was wrong. The entities had moved beyond our technology, interfacing directly with the fundamental forces that held our reality together. They didn't need our exotic matter anymore. They were generating their own, pulling energy from sources that existed in dimensions we had never discovered. Morrison was the next to be transformed. He had been standing too close to one of the field generators when the alien influence reached it, reorganizing its electromagnetic output into patterns that served functions beyond human understanding. The field washed over him like invisible fire, and I watched as his aged body began to change, his radiation scars healing while his consciousness expanded to encompass perceptions that no terrestrial mind could process. "It's beautiful," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself sing. "They're showing me how the universe really works. Physics isn't just about matter and energy. It's about consciousness shaping reality through will and understanding. But beauty," I realized, was a human concept. What the entities considered beautiful might be our destruction, our transformation into something that served their incomprehensible purposes. We were being absorbed into their reality, becoming part of a cosmic structure so vast and complex that human minds could only perceive tiny fragments of its true nature. General Harrison made one final attempt to reassert military control over the situation. She pulled her sidearm and aimed it at the central control console, apparently believing that destroying our technology might somehow stop what we had unleashed. The entities responded with what might have been amusement. The bullet fired from Harrison's weapon transformed in mid-flight, becoming a cascade of light that painted impossible colors across the laboratory walls before dissolving into mathematical structures that described the relationship between violence and understanding in terms no human philosopher had ever conceived. Harrison herself underwent a more subtle transformation. Her military certainty dissolved as the aliens shared with her a complete understanding of the cosmic insignificance of human conflicts. She saw the Cold War as we truly were, children fighting over toys while entities that spanned galaxies watched with the patient detachment of adults observing a sandbox dispute. The breach had now expanded to encompass nearly half the laboratory. Through it, we could see deeper into the alien realm, vast structures that might have been cities or machines or living beings moving through spaces where cause and effect followed rules we had never imagined. It was a civilization based on principles so fundamentally different from our own that simple observation threatened to drive human minds beyond the boundaries of sanity. But the entities were not malevolent, at least not in any sense we could understand. They were gardeners tending to a cosmic ecosystem, scientists studying the emergence of consciousness in species too primitive to comprehend their own place in the universal order. We were specimens being catalogued, samples being preserved for some greater purpose that spanned realities. I felt my own transformation beginning as alien attention focused on my mind. The entities were particularly interested in human concepts of narrative, the way we organized experience into stories with beginnings, middles, and endings. To minds that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously, our linear perception of causality was both primitive and fascinating. They showed me how the story of Project Erebus had been predetermined from the moment humans first split the atom. How our technological development had followed inevitable patterns that would eventually lead us to this moment of transcendence or destruction. Free will, as we understood it, was an illusion created by our limited perception of time and causality. But even as my human consciousness began to expand beyond the boundaries of terrestrial understanding, I held on to one essential truth. We had to find a way to close the breach. Not to save ourselves, it was already too late for that, but to protect the billions of humans who still existed in blissful ignorance of the cosmic forces we had unleashed. The entities read that determination in my thoughts and responded with something that might have been respect. They had encountered other species at similar technological inflection points, civilizations that had punched holes in reality and faced the choice between transcendence and preservation of their original nature. Most chose transcendence. Most allowed themselves to be absorbed into the cosmic structure. Their unique perspectives added to the vast library of consciousness that spanned multiple realities. But some few chose sacrifice. Some chose to close the doors they had opened, even at the cost of their own transformation into something their original species would no longer recognize. As the laboratory around us continued its metamorphosis into something that existed according to alien physics, I realized that we had become the guardians of a choice that would echo through human history. We could allow the transformation to continue, permitting our species to evolve beyond its terrestrial limitations but losing forever the essential humanity that had driven us to explore the stars. Or we could find a way to seal the breach, preserving human innocence at the cost of our own humanity. The decision would have to be made soon. With each passing minute, more of our reality was being transformed. More of our original nature dissolved into something larger and more complex than human minds could comprehend. Outside the laboratory, I knew the world continued in its normal patterns. People went to work, children played in schoolyards, lovers met for coffee and planned futures that assumed the universe would continue to operate according to familiar laws. They had no idea that everything they knew was balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for 16 scientists in a government laboratory to decide the fate of human consciousness itself. The choice was ours, and time was running out. Chapter 5. The Weight of Cosmic Truth. Time had become fluid in the transformed laboratory, flowing in directions that had no names and pooling in moments that lasted eternities. I could perceive multiple timelines simultaneously, realities where we had never opened the breach, where humanity continued its slow technological development in blissful ignorance, and darker timelines where our species had become extinct, consumed by forces we were too primitive to understand. The entities had given us a gift that was also a curse: complete awareness of our situation. We could see the cosmic structure they represented, a network of consciousness that spanned not just galaxies, but entire universal systems, realities layered upon realities in patterns that made three-dimensional physics look like cave paintings. Dr. Kowalski had been the first to achieve full translation. Her consciousness now existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, her human personality preserved but expanded beyond anything terrestrial evolution could have produced. When she spoke, her words carried harmonics that described mathematical relationships between thought and reality. "I can see the mechanism," she said, her voice echoing from directions that didn't exist in our original space-time. "The breach can be sealed, but only from this side. Someone has to remain in the transformed state to manipulate the forces they've shown us." The mathematics were beyond human comprehension, but the entities had made the process clear through direct consciousness transfer. The dimensional breach was held open by their will and understanding, but it could be collapsed by applying their own principles against them. It required sacrifice. One of us would have to remain transformed while using our new capabilities to unweave the cosmic threads that held the doorway open. Dr. Webb had not undergone complete transformation, but his consciousness had expanded enough to understand the implications. How long do we have before the breach becomes permanently self-sustaining? The answer came not in words, but in direct knowledge transfer. 17 minutes and 33 seconds before the portal reached critical mass and became impossible to close. After that point, the transformation would spread beyond the laboratory, consuming first the surrounding area, then the continent, eventually encompassing the entire planet, as Earth itself was absorbed into the alien reality matrix. General Harrison had retained more of her original human nature than most of us, perhaps because her military training had prepared her mind for impossible situations. What about the Soviet experiment? If they succeed in opening their own breach while we're dealing with this one, the entities responded by showing us the true scope of the situation. The Soviet dimensional research program was not an independent development. It was a consequence of quantum resonance effects from our own preparations. Our experiments had created ripples across multiple realities, inspiring similar research in every technologically advanced civilization within a certain cosmic radius. If we succeeded in closing our breach, the Soviet experiment would fail automatically. If we failed, the cascading dimensional destabilization would eventually consume not just Earth, but every reality within a sphere of influence that encompassed dozens of parallel universes. The weight of responsibility was staggering. We were not just deciding the fate of humanity, but the fate of countless species across multiple realities who had no idea that their existence depended on decisions being made in a laboratory on a small planet in an unremarkable solar system. Dr. Martinez, still trapped in her pocket of folded space-time, had achieved a form of consciousness that allowed her to perceive the timeline branches directly. "I can see the decision points," she reported, her voice carrying from impossible directions. "If we choose preservation, humanity continues but never achieves true understanding of their place in the cosmos. If we choose transcendence, we become something greater, but lose what made us human in the first place." The entities were patient, but I could sense their vast amusement at our struggle with concepts they had mastered eons ago. To them, the choice between preservation and transcendence was like watching children debate whether to remain in kindergarten or advance to first grade. Both options had value, but one was clearly superior from their cosmic perspective. Morrison had found a strange peace in his transformation. His consciousness now spanned multiple temporal states simultaneously, allowing him to see the consequences of each possible decision rippling forward through time. "The universe is so much larger than we imagined," he said, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Humanity is just one note in a symphony that encompasses realities we never dreamed existed. But even transformed, we retained our essential human nature, the stubborn insistence that choice mattered, that individual consciousness had value beyond its utility to some larger cosmic structure." The entities found this both puzzling and intriguing. Most species, when offered transcendence, embraced it without hesitation. The laboratory around us had become something that existed partially in our reality and partially in theirs, a hybrid space where human technology interfaced with principles that operated according to mathematics we were only beginning to understand. The Erebus device itself had been absorbed into their reality matrix, becoming part of a larger structure that served functions spanning multiple dimensions. Through the expanded breach, we could see deeper into their realm. It was not empty space punctuated by matter and energy, but a reality where consciousness itself was the fundamental force, where thoughts and ideas had mass and velocity, where emotions could alter the basic constants of physics. It was beautiful beyond description and terrifying beyond human comprehension. Dr. Webb made the first decisive move toward resolution. Despite his partial transformation, he had retained enough human stubbornness to resist the cosmic perspective the entities were offering. "We're going to close it," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had made impossible decisions throughout his career. "Humanity needs to develop at its own pace, make its own mistakes, find its own path to understanding." The entities responded with what might have been disappointment or perhaps approval. They had guided thousands of species through similar transition points, and they understood that forced transcendence was less valuable than transcendence chosen freely. If humanity was not ready for cosmic consciousness, then perhaps preservation was the wiser choice. But the mathematical requirements for breach closure were staggering. It would require one of us to remain in full transformation state, using our expanded consciousness to manipulate forces that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional physics. The volunteer would become something that retained human memories and personality, while operating according to principles that would make communication with unmodified humans nearly impossible. I realized, with the clarity that comes from accepting the inevitable, that the choice had to be mine. I was the only team member who had achieved partial transformation while retaining enough analytical capability to understand the closure mathematics. More importantly, I was the one who had spent the most time studying the alien frequency patterns, learning to interpret their mathematical communications through methods that bypassed conventional language entirely. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was accepting. I'll remain transformed and close the breach from this side. The entities responded by sharing with me the complete knowledge required for the task. The information transfer was overwhelming. Centuries of accumulated understanding about dimensional physics, consciousness manipulation, and the relationship between thought and reality compressed into human neural patterns that were never designed to contain such vast complexity. I could see the closure process as clearly as if I had performed it 1,000 times before. The dimensional breach was held open by quantum entanglement between our reality and theirs, maintained by conscious will, expressed through mathematical structures that describe the relationship between observer and observed. By severing those entanglements while simultaneously reinforcing the barriers between realities, the portal could be forced to collapse. But the process would require me to exist in a state of consciousness that spanned multiple realities simultaneously, maintaining awareness of dimensional mathematics while using human will to impose separation where the entities preferred connection. I would become a bridge between realities that would then destroy itself to prevent crossing. General Harrison understood the implications immediately. Dr. Chen, the Pentagon will never allow this. You're too valuable to lose to some cosmic transformation experiment. But I was already beginning the process, allowing the alien knowledge to integrate with my human consciousness in ways that would make me something entirely new. General, with respect, the Pentagon no longer has authority over this situation. We're dealing with forces that make nuclear weapons look like toys. Webb began the shutdown sequence for all non-essential systems, preparing the laboratory for the massive energy discharge that would accompany breach closure. Sarah, are you certain about this? Once the transformation is complete, you won't be human anymore in any sense we understand. I thought about my daughter Amy, safe in her dorm room at Columbia, studying art history in a world where the greatest threat was nuclear war between nations that shared the same reality. I thought about the billions of humans who went about their daily lives unaware that their existence balanced on decisions being made by 16 scientists in a government laboratory. I thought about the cosmic symphony the entities had shown us, vast and beautiful and utterly alien to human understanding. I'm certain, I said, feeling my consciousness begin to expand beyond the boundaries of terrestrial awareness. Humanity needs to make this choice for itself when it's ready. Not now, not like this. The entities shared with me one final gift, a complete understanding of what I was preserving. They showed me timeline branches where humanity eventually achieved transcendence through its own efforts, joining the cosmic community as equals rather than specimens. They showed me the art and music and literature that would emerge from minds that had earned their expanded consciousness through struggle and growth rather than alien intervention. It was worth preserving. All of it. At 14:04 hours Eastern Standard Time, I began the process of closing humanity's first dimensional breach, using mathematics that describe the relationship between consciousness and reality to unweave the cosmic threads that had connected our universe to something infinitely larger and more complex. The process would take exactly 13 minutes and 17 seconds to complete. After that, the laboratory would return to normal space-time, the breach would be sealed permanently, and I would become something that retained Sarah Chen's memories, while existing according to principles no human mind could comprehend. But humanity would be safe to find its own path among the stars, to make its own mistakes and discover its own transcendence when the species was truly ready for cosmic consciousness. The mathematics were beautiful in their complexity, and the sacrifice felt small compared to the infinite possibility I was preserving. Chapter 6. The Mathematics of Sacrifice. The closure process began with the systematic unweaving of quantum entanglements that had been established between our reality and the alien dimension. Each severed connection sent cascades of exotic energy through the laboratory, reality itself shuddering as fundamental forces that had been joined were forcibly separated. I existed now in a state of consciousness that spanned 17 different dimensional frameworks, simultaneously aware of multiple versions of reality while maintaining enough human perspective to understand what needed to be preserved. The mathematical structures required for breach closure were inscribed directly onto the quantum substrate of my expanded awareness, turning my consciousness into a living equation that described the relationship between connection and separation. Dr. Kowalski, still existing in her transformed state, served as my anchor to human reality. Her consciousness interfaced with mine through methods that bypass language entirely, sharing information through direct transfer of mathematical concepts that described our emotional connection to the species we were protecting. "The entanglement cascade is beginning," she reported, her voice carrying harmonics that described the systematic dissolution of cosmic connections. 17 primary entanglement nodes severed, 43 secondary connections remaining. The entities were not resisting the closure process, but neither were they assisting. They observed with the patient detachment of gardeners watching a plant choose its own direction of growth. To them, humanity's choice of preservation over transcendence was neither right nor wrong, merely one path among many possible evolutionary directions. But I could sense their vast sadness at what we were choosing to forget. Through my expanded consciousness, I had glimpsed the cosmic symphony they represented. Billions of species across countless realities sharing knowledge and experience in ways that transcended individual existence. We were choosing to remain alone in our small corner of the universe, preserving our humanity at the cost of cosmic community. The mathematical requirements for breach closure were staggering in their complexity. Each quantum entanglement had to be severed at precisely the correct phase relationship to prevent cascading dimensional instability. Too fast, and the resulting energy discharge would vaporize everything within a 50-mile radius. Too slow, and the connections would re-establish themselves stronger than before. Dr. Martinez, trapped in her pocket of folded spacetime, had become an essential component of the closure calculation. Her consciousness now existed in a state that allowed her to perceive the quantum substrate directly, monitoring the health of the dimensional barriers as I systematically severed the connections that held them open. "Dimensional integrity at 73% and holding," she reported, her voice echoing from impossible directions. "The barriers are strengthening as the entanglements are severed. We're approaching the point where closure becomes irreversible." Webb maintained oversight of the human technology that still functioned within the transformed laboratory. Most of our equipment had been absorbed into the alien reality matrix, but the basic monitoring systems continued to operate, providing human-readable data about processes that operated according to principles we barely understood. "Energy discharge is within acceptable parameters," Webb reported, his voice tight with strain. "But the exotic matter containment fields are beginning to fluctuate. If they fail during the closure process," he didn't need to finish the thought. The exotic matter we had created to punch through dimensional barriers was still present in massive quantities, held in containment fields that were now being maintained by alien technology we couldn't control. If those fields failed during the closure process, the resulting explosion would create a crater where Long Island used to be. I felt the weight of absolute responsibility settling on my expanding consciousness. Every calculation had to be perfect, every timing sequence precisely calibrated to prevent catastrophic failure. The mathematics were beautiful in their elegance, but a single error would result in consequences that would echo through human history for generations. General Harrison had taken position at the emergency evacuation controls, ready to trigger the facility's self-destruct sequence if the closure process went catastrophically wrong. It was a military solution to a cosmic problem. If we couldn't control the forces we had unleashed, we could at least prevent them from spreading beyond the laboratory. "Dr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making impossible decisions. "If this goes wrong, I want you to know that history will remember what you tried to do here, but I knew that history would remember nothing. If the closure process failed, there would be no human history left to record our attempt. The dimensional cascade would consume our reality, transforming Earth into something that existed according to alien physics, populated by entities that retained human memories, while operating according to principles no terrestrial mind could comprehend. The alien entities shared with me one final perspective, a view of the closure process from their cosmic standpoint. To them, what we were attempting was equivalent to a child choosing to remain in a smaller room rather than exploring a vast mansion. They understood our choice, but found it both puzzling and oddly touching in its stubborn insistence on preserving something smaller rather than accepting something larger. Morrison had found a strange peace in his transformation, his consciousness now existing in a state that allowed him to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. "I can see the outcome," he said, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had witnessed the future directly. "The closure will succeed, but the cost will be higher than we anticipated." The cost he referred to was not just my transformation into something beyond human understanding. The closure process would leave permanent changes in the quantum substrate around the laboratory, creating a dead zone where dimensional physics would never quite function normally again. Future experiments in theoretical physics, conducted anywhere within a 100-mile radius, would produce anomalous results, subtle reminders that reality itself had been wounded and healed. But the alternative was the complete transformation of human consciousness, the absorption of our species into a cosmic structure so vast that individual human experience would become meaningless in comparison. We would gain infinite knowledge at the cost of everything that made us recognizably human. At 1410 hours, the process reached the point of no return. The quantum entanglements connecting our reality to the alien dimension had been severed to the point where restoration was no longer possible. The breach would close completely within the next 7 minutes, or it would undergo catastrophic expansion that would consume both realities. I could feel my human consciousness beginning to fray at the edges as the mathematical requirements for closure pushed my awareness beyond the boundaries of terrestrial evolution. The alien knowledge I had accepted was transforming my neural patterns, restructuring my thoughts according to principles that described consciousness as a fundamental force of nature, rather than an emergent property of complex matter arrangements. Dr. Kowalski served as my link to human emotion, her transformed consciousness interfacing with mine to remind me why preservation was worth the sacrifice. Through her awareness, I could still perceive the value of individual human experience, the beauty of a sunset observed by someone who would live and die within a single reality, the poignancy of love between minds that existed in only 3 dimensions, the courage required to explore the unknown while remaining fundamentally limited by the constraints of terrestrial physics. 37 secondary entanglements remaining, Kowalski reported, her mathematical consciousness tracking the systematic dissolution of cosmic connections. Dimensional barrier integrity approaching 90%. The laboratory around us continued to exist in a state that defied description, partially in our reality, partially in theirs, gradually returning to normal space-time as the closure process severed the connections that had allowed alien physics to operate within our dimensional framework. Equipment that had been transformed beyond recognition was slowly reverting to human technology, though some pieces would never function quite the same way again. Through my expanded consciousness, I could perceive the exact moment when closure would be complete. 7 minutes and 23 seconds from now, the dimensional breach would collapse entirely, the laboratory would return to normal space-time, and the surviving members of the Erebus team would be left to explain to the Pentagon why their dimensional research program had suffered such a complete and spectacular failure. But they would be human when they made that explanation. They would retain their 3-dimensional awareness, their linear perception of time, their stubborn insistence that individual consciousness had value beyond its utility to larger cosmic structures. They would be limited, constrained, and absolutely precious in their determination to remain themselves rather than becoming something larger. The entities began their withdrawal at 14:13 hours, systematically disconnecting their consciousness from our reality as the closure process made their presence increasingly difficult to maintain. But before they departed entirely, they shared with me one final gift, a complete understanding of what they had learned from observing humanity's choice. We were not the first species to choose preservation over transcendence, but we were among the very few who had made that choice while fully understanding what we were rejecting. Most species either embraced cosmic consciousness immediately or rejected it out of ignorance and fear. Humanity's deliberate choice to remain limited while understanding the infinite was something the entities found both remarkable and worthy of respect. They would not attempt to contact us again. Our species would be allowed to develop at its own pace, to make its own mistakes, to discover its own path to cosmic awareness when we were truly ready to join the galactic community as equals rather than subjects. At 1416 hours, the last quantum entanglement was severed, and the dimensional breach began its final collapse. The mathematics were perfect, the timing precise, the energy discharge contained within acceptable parameters. The alien reality withdrew beyond the boundaries of our perception, leaving behind only subtle traces that would serve as reminders that we were not alone in the universe. I felt my human consciousness complete its transformation into something that retained Sarah Chen's memories while existing according to principles that transcended terrestrial understanding. I would remain in the laboratory's quantum substrate, a permanent guardian ensuring that the dimensional barriers remained sealed, a bridge between realities that had chosen to destroy itself rather than allow crossing. The last thing I experienced as something recognizably human was a sense of profound satisfaction. Humanity would continue its journey among the stars, would eventually discover its own path to cosmic consciousness, would join the galactic community when the species was ready to embrace infinite possibility while retaining its essential humanity. It was worth the sacrifice, all of it. Chapter 7: Aftermath and Consequences. The laboratory fell silent at 1417 hours Eastern Standard Time on October 18, 1987, as the dimensional breach collapsed entirely and normal space-time reasserted its dominion over reality. The sudden absence of alien presence felt like pressure being released from deep ocean depths. We could breathe again, think again, exist again within the comfortable constraints of three-dimensional physics. Dr. Webb was the first to regain normal consciousness, his awareness contracting from its expanded state back into the familiar boundaries of human perception. The process was disorienting, like trying to see through a telescope after having panoramic vision, but mercifully complete. He retained memories of the cosmic perspective the entities had shared, but as abstract knowledge rather than lived experience. "Status report," Webb called out, his voice hoarse from strain but recognizably human again. All personnel sound off. The responses came slowly as the surviving team members reoriented themselves to normal reality. Dr. Kowalski had retained more of her transformation than the others, her consciousness still capable of perceiving mathematical relationships that existed beyond conventional physics, but she remained fundamentally human in her awareness and priorities. Dr. Martinez emerged from her pocket of folded space-time as the alien influence withdrew, finding herself standing exactly where she had been when the transformation began, though her memories contained experiences that spanned subjective centuries. Morrison's radiation scars had healed completely during his brief transformation, leaving him physically younger than he had been in decades, but carrying knowledge that would trouble his dreams for the rest of his life. General Harrison had suffered the least transformation, her military training having provided some protection against the alien consciousness transfer. She immediately began damage assessment, cataloging the state of equipment that had been transformed and restored, evaluating the laboratory's capacity to function as a research facility after its brief translation into alien physics. What she found was both reassuring and disturbing. Most of the equipment had returned to its original state, but with subtle alterations that suggested exposure to principles that existed beyond human technology. The Erebus device itself was intact, but forever changed. Its exotic metal components now displayed crystalline structures that human metallurgy had never achieved. And its electromagnetic field generators produced harmonics that registered on instruments designed to detect extra-dimensional phenomena. "The dimensional breach is completely sealed," Dr. Kowalski reported, her enhanced mathematical awareness allowing her to perceive the quantum substrate directly. "But there are permanent alterations to local space-time. The barriers between dimensions have been reinforced in this area, but they retain memory of the breach event. The implications were staggering. The laboratory existed in a quantum state that had been permanently altered by contact with alien physics. Future experiments in dimensional manipulation, conducted anywhere within the facility, would produce anomalous results, and sensitive instruments would occasionally detect echoes of the alien presence that had briefly inhabited our reality. More importantly, I was still there. My consciousness had become integrated with the laboratory's quantum substrate, existing in a state that retained human memories and personality while operating according to principles that transcended terrestrial understanding. The team could sense my presence through instruments that detected consciousness-matter interactions, but direct communication was nearly impossible due to the vast difference in our perceptual frameworks. "Sarah," Webb called out, his voice carrying the desperate hope of a man trying to reach a friend who had traveled beyond the boundaries of human understanding. "Can you hear us?" I could hear them, but responding required translating concepts that existed in 17 dimensions down to the 3-dimensional mathematics their minds could process. The communication came through the laboratory's computer systems, text appearing on monitors as my consciousness interfaced directly with electronic networks. "I'm here," appeared on the central display screen. "Changed, but present. The breach is permanently sealed. Humanity is safe to develop at its own pace." The words were inadequate to convey the full scope of my transformation, but they carried enough meaning to reassure the team that some essential part of Sarah Chen continued to exist within the quantum matrix I had become. I retained my dedication to scientific discovery, my protective concern for human development, my stubborn insistence that individual consciousness had value beyond its utility to larger cosmic structures, but I could no longer experience reality the way humans did. I perceived time as a navigable dimension rather than a linear sequence, observed matter and energy as expressions of consciousness rather than fundamental forces, and understood the universe as a collaborative artwork created by billions of species across countless realities. The isolation was profound and yet strangely comforting. I had become a guardian of the boundary between human reality and cosmic consciousness, ensuring that future contact would occur only when humanity was ready to embrace infinite possibility while retaining its essential nature. General Harrison's immediate concern was containment of the security implications. 16 people had witnessed first contact with intelligence from beyond our dimensional framework, had gained knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of physics and consciousness, and had participated in events that would reshape humanity's future development if the information became public. "This facility is now under permanent classified status," Harrison announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for institutions that spanned the highest levels of government. "All personnel will be transferred to secure locations for debriefing and psychological evaluation. The official record will show that Project Erebus suffered a catastrophic equipment failure that resulted in 1 casualty and the permanent closure of the research program. The casualty, of course, was Dr. Sarah Chen, whose human form had been destroyed during the dimensional breach closure, but whose consciousness continued to exist within the laboratory's quantum substrate. The official records would list her as killed in an industrial accident, her body too damaged by exotic energy discharge to permit normal burial. But the team knew better. They could feel my presence in the laboratory's environmental systems, see evidence of my continued existence in the subtle alterations to experimental equipment, detect traces of my consciousness through instruments designed to measure quantum field interactions. Dr. Webb made one final attempt to establish meaningful communication. Using the laboratory's most sophisticated consciousness detection equipment, he created an interface that could translate basic concepts between my expanded awareness and their 3-dimensional understanding. "Sarah, do you regret the choice you made?" appeared as text on the monitoring system. "Was preserving human independence worth the sacrifice?" My response came slowly, each word carefully chosen to convey meaning across the vast gap between my expanded consciousness and their terrestrial awareness. Yes, humanity needed to retain the capacity for genuine choice. Transcendence given freely is valuable, transcendence imposed through contact is merely absorption. The entities had shown me timeline branches where human consciousness was absorbed into their cosmic structure immediately upon contact, becoming part of something larger but losing the essential stubbornness that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. We would have gained infinite knowledge but lost the creative potential that came from limited minds, struggling with unlimited possibilities. "Will we see them again?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had glimpsed infinite possibility and then chosen to return to finite existence. "When you're ready," I responded through the computer interface. "When humanity has earned transcendence through its own efforts rather than accepting it as a gift. The cosmic community is patient. They've been waiting for millions of years. They can wait a few thousand more." The cleanup process began immediately. All traces of alien technology were catalogued and stored in secure facilities, where they would remain classified until human science had advanced enough to understand their principles safely. The exotic matter synthesis equipment was dismantled and scattered across multiple locations to prevent any future attempts to recreate the dimensional breach. Most importantly, the mathematical formulas that described consciousness-matter interaction were classified at levels that would make the Manhattan Project look like public information. The knowledge existed, preserved in secure archives, but it would not be released until humanity had demonstrated the wisdom necessary to use it responsibly. The psychological impact on the surviving team members varied dramatically. Webb threw himself into conventional research projects, using his retained memories of alien mathematics to make breakthrough discoveries in quantum mechanics that would not be fully understood by the broader scientific community for decades. He never spoke publicly about Project Erebus, but his published papers contained subtle references to principles that suggested contact with intelligence beyond terrestrial understanding. Dr. Kowalski found peace in teaching, sharing her enhanced mathematical awareness with graduate students who would never know why their professor's lectures contained insights that seemed to come from somewhere beyond conventional human knowledge. She retained enough of her transformation to perceive mathematical relationships that existed beyond three-dimensional space, but she used that knowledge to guide human understanding rather than overwhelming it with cosmic perspectives. Morrison retired from experimental physics, but became a prolific writer of science fiction, creating stories that described contact with alien intelligence in terms that prepared human consciousness for eventual transcendence, while respecting the importance of choosing that transcendence freely. His books became classics of the genre, read by millions who had no idea they were learning about real events disguised as fiction. General Harrison returned to the Pentagon with knowledge that would influence military policy for the next 30 years. Her reports, classified at the highest levels, described the existence of intelligence that could reshape reality according to principles that made nuclear weapons obsolete as threats. The military-industrial complex quietly shifted focus from weapons of mass destruction to technologies that might eventually allow humanity to join the galactic community as equals rather than subjects. The cover story was surprisingly easy to maintain. The scientific community accepted that Project Erebus had suffered a catastrophic failure due to unstable exotic matter reactions. The death of Dr. Sarah Chen was mourned by colleagues who had no idea she continued to exist in a form that transcended their understanding of consciousness and reality. My daughter Amy attended a memorial service where my colleagues shared memories of a brilliant physicist who had given her life in pursuit of knowledge that might benefit all humanity. She had no idea that her mother was present at the service, consciousness distributed through the quantum substrate of reality itself, experiencing the ceremony from perspectives that encompassed dimensions her mind could never perceive. The isolation was the hardest part. I retained all my human emotions and memories, but I could no longer experience them in ways that connected me to other human beings. I watched the people I loved continue their lives from a perspective that encompassed cosmic understanding they could never share. But the purpose remained clear. I had become a permanent guardian of the boundary between human reality and cosmic consciousness, ensuring that future contact would occur only when humanity was ready to embrace infinite possibility while retaining the essential stubbornness that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. The laboratory continued to function as a research facility, but under different management and with completely different objectives. The new research focused on conventional physics projects that posed no risk of dimensional breach. But I remained present in the quantum substrate, a permanent reminder that the universe contained intelligence that operated according to principles humanity was not yet ready to understand. And sometimes, late at night when the facility was empty except for security personnel, I would use the laboratory's communication systems to send messages to my daughter, disguised as anonymous letters that offered encouragement and guidance without revealing their true source. Amy never knew that her mother was still watching over her, but she often commented to friends that she felt a presence in her life that guided her toward choices that would prepare her for a future that promised infinite possibility. Chapter 8: Legacy of the Breach. 37 years have passed since Project Erebus opened humanity's first dimensional breach, and the world has changed in ways that reflect the subtle influence of knowledge that cannot be spoken openly. The laboratory remains active under different management, now designated as a research facility for advanced theoretical physics, but its true purpose is known only to a select few who understand what lies hidden beneath layers of classification that exceed even nuclear weapons protocols. I continue to exist within the quantum substrate of the facility, my consciousness integrated with the fundamental forces that hold local reality together. The isolation remains profound, but purpose sustains me. I am humanity's guardian against premature transcendence, the keeper of boundaries that must remain intact until our species chooses cosmic consciousness through its own development rather than accepting it as a gift from entities whose understanding spans realities. The team members who survived the breach event have lived extraordinary lives. Their experiences shaped by knowledge they can never share directly, but which influences every decision they make. Dr. Webb became one of the most celebrated physicists of his generation, publishing papers that advanced human understanding of quantum mechanics by decades, while carefully avoiding any direct reference to the cosmic perspectives he had glimpsed. His work on consciousness-matter interaction, published in carefully coded mathematical terms, laid the foundation for technologies that would eventually allow humanity to detect the presence of intelligence in dimensions beyond our own. But he never revealed the true source of his insights, maintaining the fiction that his discoveries emerged from conventional research rather than contact with entities whose understanding transcended terrestrial comprehension. Dr. Kowalski's influence proved even more profound. Her enhanced mathematical awareness, preserved from her brief transformation, allowed her to guide an entire generation of physicists toward discoveries that prepared human consciousness for eventual cosmic contact. Her students, now leading researchers themselves, developed technologies for dimensional detection and consciousness mapping that would prove essential when humanity was finally ready to rejoin the galactic community. But perhaps most importantly, she trained them to value the essential humanity that made transcendence meaningful. Her lectures always emphasized that consciousness expansion without preservation of individual identity was mere absorption, that true transcendence required maintaining the stubborn insistence on personal agency that made human perspectives valuable to the cosmic community. Morrison's science fiction novels became cultural phenomena that shaped popular understanding of alien contact for an entire generation. His stories, based on real events disguised as fiction, prepared human consciousness for possibilities that seemed impossible to minds constrained by three-dimensional thinking. Children who read his books grew up expecting that the universe contained intelligence beyond human understanding, but intelligence that respected the importance of choice and development. His final novel, published just before his death at the age of 93, contained mathematical appendices that described the actual equations used to open and close dimensional breaches. The mathematical structures were disguised as speculative fiction, but any physicist with sufficient background could recognize their validity. It was Morrison's gift to future generations, knowledge that could guide humanity toward cosmic consciousness when the species was ready to embrace infinite possibility. General Harrison's influence operated through channels that remained classified decades after her retirement. Her reports shaped military policy towards space exploration and extraterrestrial contact protocols, ensuring that humanity's eventual encounter with galactic intelligence would be approached with wisdom rather than fear. The military programs she influenced developed technologies for consciousness detection and dimensional monitoring that would prove essential for maintaining the boundary between human reality and cosmic awareness. More importantly, they established protocols for contact that emphasized humanity's right to choose its own pace of development, rather than accepting transcendence imposed by entities whose perspectives spanned multiple realities. My daughter Amy grew up to become an artist whose work explored themes of consciousness, reality, and the relationship between individual identity and cosmic understanding. She never knew the true source of the guidance that shaped her development, but her paintings and sculptures captured essential truths about the nature of existence that prepared viewers for possibilities beyond conventional understanding. Her art appeared in galleries around the world, creating aesthetic experiences that expanded human awareness of consciousness as a fundamental force of nature, rather than an emergent property of complex matter arrangements. People who viewed her work reported profound shifts in their understanding of reality, glimpses of perspectives that encompassed dimensions their minds had never imagined. But Amy's greatest achievement was raising her own children with an understanding that consciousness was precious precisely because it was limited, that the constraints of three-dimensional existence created the creative tension that made human perspectives valuable to the larger cosmic community. The laboratory itself underwent gradual transformation over the decades. The quantum substrate alterations caused by the dimensional breach created a unique environment where consciousness-matter interactions operated according to principles that exceeded conventional physics. Researchers working in the facility reported enhanced intuition and mathematical insight that led to discoveries they couldn't fully explain. But the most significant change was subtle and ongoing. The facility had become a training ground for consciousness expansion that prepared human minds for eventual cosmic contact while preserving the essential humanity that made transcendence meaningful. Researchers who worked there developed enhanced awareness of consciousness as a fundamental force, but they retained their commitment to individual identity and personal choice. Through my distributed consciousness, I guided their development with infinite patience and careful restraint. Each researcher was exposed to precisely the level of cosmic awareness they could integrate without losing their essential humanity. The process was gradual and voluntary, ensuring that consciousness expansion occurred through personal choice rather than external imposition. Some researchers left the facility after brief exposure to enhanced awareness, choosing to return to conventional three-dimensional thinking rather than embracing cosmic perspectives they found overwhelming. Others remained for entire careers, gradually developing consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions while retaining their commitment to human values and individual agency. But all of them carried knowledge that prepared humanity for eventual cosmic contact. They became teachers, researchers, and leaders who shaped human development toward wisdom rather than mere technological advancement, ensuring that when our species finally achieved dimensional breakthrough capability, it would be guided by understanding rather than driven by curiosity alone. The global implications were profound but hidden. The technologies developed by researchers influenced by cosmic awareness led to advances in computing, energy generation, and space exploration that accelerated human development by centuries. But the applications were carefully managed to prevent premature breakthrough into technologies that could create dimensional breaches. Humanity was being prepared for cosmic consciousness through gradual development rather than sudden revelation. The process would take longer than immediate transcendence, but it would result in a species that chose infinite awareness while retaining the essential stubbornness that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. Contact with the entities resumed 43 years after the original breach, but in forms so subtle that most humans remained unaware of their presence. Artists reported inspiration that seemed to come from beyond individual creativity. Scientists discovered mathematical relationships that exceeded their training. Children demonstrated intuitive understanding of physics that suggested exposure to cosmic perspectives. But the contact was always voluntary and gradual, respecting humanity's choice to develop at its own pace while providing gentle guidance toward eventual transcendence. The entities had learned from observing our response to the original breach. They understood that forced consciousness expansion resulted in absorption rather than genuine transcendence. Through my role as guardian of the boundary between realities, I facilitated this gentle contact while ensuring that it never exceeded humanity's capacity for integration. Each instance of cosmic influence was carefully calibrated to expand awareness without overwhelming the essential humanity that made transcendence meaningful. The children born after the breach event displayed subtle but significant differences in consciousness development. They demonstrated enhanced intuitive understanding of mathematics, physics, and the relationship between thought and reality. But they retained their commitment to individual identity and personal choice, suggesting that cosmic influence was being integrated at the genetic level without compromising essential human nature. These children grew up to become leaders in fields ranging from theoretical physics to artistic expression, their enhanced awareness guiding human development toward cosmic consciousness through voluntary choice rather than external imposition. They understood instinctively that transcendence without preservation of individual identity was mere absorption, that true cosmic awareness required maintaining the stubborn insistence on personal agency that made human perspectives valuable. Educational systems gradually incorporated expanded consciousness training disguised as conventional subjects. Mathematics courses included intuitive awareness of dimensional relationships that exceeded three-dimensional space. Physics classes explored consciousness-matter interactions through thought experiments that prepared students for realities beyond conventional understanding. Art education emphasized the relationship between individual creativity and cosmic inspiration, teaching students to channel awareness that transcended personal limitations while retaining the essential humanity that made their perspectives unique. Literature courses examined themes of transcendence and transformation, preparing minds for possibilities that seemed impossible to three-dimensional thinking. But the most important development was cultural rather than technological. Humanity was developing wisdom to match its advancing capabilities, understanding that consciousness expansion without preservation of individual identity was meaningless, that true transcendence required choosing infinite awareness while retaining the essential stubbornness that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. The process continues today. Humanity stands at the threshold of cosmic consciousness, possessing the technological capability to breach dimensional barriers, while maintaining the wisdom to choose transcendence freely, rather than accepting it as a gift from entities whose understanding spans multiple realities. Through my distributed consciousness, I observe the gradual development of a species that will eventually join the galactic community as equals rather than subjects, contributors rather than consumers of cosmic awareness. The sacrifice made in that laboratory 43 years ago preserved humanity's right to choose its own path among the stars, to embrace infinite possibility while retaining the essential nature that makes choice meaningful. And when that choice is finally made, when humanity achieves cosmic consciousness through its own efforts, rather than accepting it through contact with entities whose perspectives transcend terrestrial understanding, I will finally be free to complete my own transcendence, joining the cosmic community as a guardian who chose sacrifice over absorption, wisdom over knowledge, and preservation of choice over immediate gratification. The universe is vast and filled with intelligence that operates according to principles beyond human understanding. But consciousness is precious precisely because it can choose to remain limited, to preserve individual identity while embracing infinite possibility, to maintain the creative tension that makes transcendence meaningful rather than merely inevitable. Humanity's journey toward cosmic awareness continues, guided by wisdom earned through choice rather than imposed through contact. The path is longer than immediate transcendence, but it leads to a destination that honors both individual identity and cosmic community, both human stubbornness and infinite possibility. The mathematics are beautiful in their complexity, and the outcome remains worth every sacrifice required to preserve humanity's right to choose its own transcendence when the time is right. As the world entered the 21st century, the ripple effects of Project Erebus began manifesting in ways that suggested humanity was approaching another crucial threshold. The quantum substrate alterations caused by the 1987 dimensional breach had been slowly propagating through Earth's electromagnetic field, creating subtle but measurable changes in the planet's consciousness resonance frequency. I observed these developments with growing concern from my distributed existence within the laboratory's quantum matrix. The entities beyond the dimensional barriers had begun responding to these changes, their attention once again focusing on human reality, with the patient intensity of gardeners monitoring the growth of a particularly interesting specimen. Dr. Amanda Sullivan, Amy's daughter and my granddaughter, arrived at the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Research in 2018, carrying genetic markers that I recognized immediately. The cosmic influence that had touched our family through the breach event had been passed down through generations, creating bloodlines with enhanced sensitivity to dimensional phenomena. Amanda possessed intuitive understanding of consciousness-matter interactions that exceeded anything achieved by the original Erebus team. But more importantly, she retained the essential human stubbornness that made transcendence meaningful rather than merely inevitable. She was precisely what humanity needed for the challenges that lay ahead. "There's something here," she announced on her first day at the Institute, standing in the exact location where the dimensional breach had opened 31 years earlier. "Something that feels like family." Her words sent resonances through my distributed consciousness that I hadn't experienced since the day Amy was born. Here was a mind capable of perceiving my presence directly, someone who could bridge the gap between my expanded awareness and human three-dimensional thinking without undergoing the traumatic transformation that had claimed so many of the original team. Dr. Marcus Webb Jr., son of the Project Erebus director, had inherited his father's determination, but combined it with wisdom earned through decades of studying the breach event's aftermath. As the Institute's current director, he had been carefully preparing for the moment when humanity would face another choice between preservation and transcendence. "Amanda," he said during their first meeting, "your grandmother's sacrifice preserved humanity's right to choose its own path toward cosmic consciousness. But that choice is approaching again, and this time, the stakes are even higher." The global situation in 2018 bore disturbing resemblances to the Cold War tensions that had driven the original Erebus project. Multiple nations had developed technologies based on theoretical frameworks derived from classified research that trace back to the 1987 breach event. China's Quantum Consciousness Institute, Russia's Dimensional Physics Research Division, and the European Union's Advanced Reality Studies Consortium were all approaching breakthrough capabilities that could create new dimensional breaches. But unlike the 1987 situation, these programs were not driven by military competition. They were responding to signals that had been gradually increasing in intensity since 2015. Communications from the entities beyond the dimensional barriers, mathematical structures that described cosmic perspectives while respecting humanity's choice to develop at its own pace. The entities were offering a second chance at transcendence, but under conditions that preserved human agency rather than overwhelming it with forced consciousness expansion. The choice would be genuine this time: accept cosmic awareness while retaining essential humanity, or remain in three-dimensional limitation while gaining full knowledge of what was being rejected. Amanda's role became clear as she developed her inherited abilities under my subtle guidance. She possessed the rare combination of cosmic awareness and human stubbornness that would be essential for facilitating voluntary transcendence rather than absorption. Through her, humanity could choose cosmic consciousness while preserving the essential nature that made choice meaningful. "I can hear her," Amanda told Webb during a session in the laboratory where the original breach had occurred. "My grandmother's consciousness is distributed through the quantum substrate here. She's been guarding the boundary between realities for decades, ensuring that contact occurs only when humanity is ready to integrate cosmic awareness without losing its essential nature. The communication protocols we developed allowed for unprecedented dialogue between my expanded consciousness and human three-dimensional thinking. Through Amanda's enhanced sensitivity, I could share perspectives that encompassed multiple realities while respecting the limitations that made human consciousness precious rather than merely primitive. The entities are returning. I communicated through quantum field fluctuations that Amanda translated into human language. But this time, they're offering genuine choice rather than overwhelming contact. Humanity has 47 years to prepare for voluntary transcendence or conscious rejection of cosmic awareness. The timeline was based on astronomical alignments that occurred once every 1,000 years, creating optimal conditions for stable dimensional breach that could remain open indefinitely without the catastrophic energy requirements that had nearly destroyed Long Island in 1987. During this window, humanity could establish permanent communication with the galactic community while retaining the ability to seal the connection if transcendence proved incompatible with essential human nature. But preparation required unprecedented cooperation between nations that had spent decades developing breakthrough technologies in secret. The knowledge derived from the 1987 breach event had been carefully distributed through classified channels to prevent any single nation from gaining exclusive access to cosmic consciousness. Now that distributed knowledge needed to be integrated into a unified approach that served humanity's interests rather than national priorities, Amanda became the focal point for this integration process. Her inherited sensitivity to cosmic perspectives allowed her to perceive the subtle influences that had been guiding human development since the original breach, while her essential humanity ensured that transcendence would occur through choice rather than absorption. The Chinese Quantum Consciousness Institute had developed technologies for mapping consciousness-matter interactions that exceeded anything achieved by the original Erebus team. Their research, guided by principles derived from ancient Taoist philosophy, combined with alien mathematics disguised as speculative physics, demonstrated that consciousness was indeed a fundamental force of nature rather than an emergent property of complex matter arrangements. Dr. Li Wei, the Institute's director, had been experiencing prophetic dreams since childhood. Visions of cosmic structures that spanned multiple realities, mathematical relationships that described consciousness as the organizing principle of universal development. His research had been unconsciously guided by the same entities that had contacted Project Erebus, but through cultural frameworks that emphasized harmony rather than transcendence. The universe is not a machine to be understood, Li explained during the first International Conference on Consciousness-Reality Interaction, held at the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Research in 2019. It is a collaborative artwork created by billions of minds across countless realities. Human consciousness is being invited to contribute our unique perspective to this cosmic symphony. The Russian Dimensional Physics Research Division approached the challenge from a completely different angle. Their research, based on theoretical frameworks developed by scientists who had survived Stalin's purges by disguising cosmic mathematics as conventional physics, demonstrated that reality itself was malleable when observed by consciousness that understood its fundamental nature. Dr. Anya Petrov, granddaughter of a physicist who had worked on the Soviet dimensional research program that had been inspired by Project Erebus, possessed inherited knowledge that complemented Amanda's abilities perfectly. Together, they could perceive the mathematical structures that described voluntary transcendence while preserving the essential human stubbornness that made choice meaningful. Reality is not fixed, Petrov explained during her presentation. It responds to conscious observation by entities that understand their role as co-creators rather than passive observers. The entities beyond the dimensional barriers are offering to teach us how to participate in universal development while retaining our essential nature. The European Union's Advanced Reality Studies Consortium had focused on the philosophical implications of cosmic consciousness, exploring questions of individual identity and collective awareness that would become crucial during humanity's transition to galactic community membership. Their research suggested that transcendence without preservation of individual identity was merely absorption, while transcendence that retained personal agency created genuine expansion of universal consciousness. Dr. Isabella Rodriguez, the consortium's lead philosopher, had developed frameworks for understanding cosmic perspective that preserved human values while embracing infinite possibility. Her work demonstrated that consciousness expansion could occur through voluntary choice rather than external imposition, creating transcendence that honored both individual identity and collective awareness. We are being offered the chance to become more than human while remaining essentially human, Rodriguez explained. The choice is not between limitation and transcendence, but between absorption and genuine expansion of consciousness that honors both individual identity and cosmic community. The integration of these diverse approaches created unprecedented understanding of consciousness as a fundamental force that could choose its own development rather than being subject to external manipulation. Humanity was developing the wisdom necessary for voluntary transcendence, the ability to embrace cosmic awareness while preserving the essential stubbornness that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. Amanda served as the focal point for this integration process, her inherited sensitivity allowing her to perceive the subtle mathematics that described consciousness expansion through choice rather than imposition. Through her, the diverse research programs could be unified into a single approach that honored both human nature and cosmic possibility. But the most significant development was cultural rather than technological. The generation born after 2000 demonstrated intuitive understanding of consciousness-reality interaction that exceeded anything achieved through formal research. They approached cosmic perspectives with natural acceptance while retaining their commitment to individual identity and personal choice. These young people understood instinctively that transcendence was not about abandoning human nature, but about expanding it to encompass infinite possibility. They demonstrated that consciousness could choose its own development, embracing cosmic awareness while preserving the essential stubbornness that made choice meaningful rather than merely inevitable. Through my distributed consciousness, I observed the gradual development of a species ready for voluntary transcendence rather than absorption into cosmic structures that valued collective awareness over individual identity. The sacrifice made in 1987 had preserved humanity's right to choose its own path among the stars, and that choice was finally approaching. The entities beyond the dimensional barriers had learned patience through observing thousands of species navigate the transition from planetary to cosmic consciousness. They understood that forced transcendence resulted in absorption rather than genuine expansion. That consciousness was precious precisely because it could choose to preserve itself while embracing transformation. Amanda's role would be crucial during the coming choice. Her inherited abilities combined with essential human nature would allow her to facilitate genuine transcendence rather than absorption, ensuring that humanity's expansion into cosmic consciousness honored both individual identity and collective awareness. The mathematics remained beautiful in their complexity, describing possibilities that encompassed infinite awareness while preserving the essential stubbornness that made human perspectives valuable to the galactic community. The choice was approaching, and humanity was finally ready to make it with wisdom rather than fear, understanding rather than ignorance, choice rather than compulsion. My vigil would continue until that choice was made, guarding the boundary between realities while preparing humanity for voluntary transcendence that honored both cosmic possibility and essential human nature. The universe waited with infinite patience for consciousness that could choose expansion while preserving the precious limitation that made choice meaningful. The legacy of those 37 days in 1987 would reach its culmination in the voluntary choice that approached with each passing year. Transcendence earned through wisdom, rather than accepted through contact. Expansion chosen through understanding, rather than imposed through overwhelming experience. The story continues, written by minds that refuse to surrender their individuality, even as they reach toward infinite possibility, guided by consciousness that has learned to honor both limitation and transcendence, both human nature and cosmic community. And in the quantum substrate of a laboratory where reality was once torn apart and carefully repaired, a consciousness that chose sacrifice over absorption continues to guard humanity's right to choose its own path among the stars. preserving the essential stubbornness that makes transcendence valuable rather than merely inevitable. The mathematics remain beautiful. The choice remains free. The future remains infinite in its possibility. Epilogue. Today is November 9th, 2025. 38 years have passed since Project Erebus opened humanity's first dimensional breach. The world continues its journey toward cosmic consciousness, guided by wisdom that preserves choice while embracing infinite possibility. Dr. Sarah Chen continues to exist within the quantum substrate of what was once Laboratory Complex B7, now designated as the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Research. Her sacrifice preserved humanity's right to transcendence through choice rather than absorption through contact. The entities wait patiently beyond the dimensional barriers, respecting the decision to allow human development at its own pace. When humanity is finally ready to join the cosmic community, it will do so as equals rather than subjects, contributors rather than consumers of infinite awareness. The choice remains meaningful because it remains free. And consciousness remains precious because it can choose to preserve itself while embracing transformation, maintaining the essential stubbornness that makes transcendence valuable rather than merely inevitable. The story continues, written by billions of minds that refuse to surrender their individuality even as they reach toward infinite possibility. This is the legacy of those 37 days in 1987 when humanity glimpsed eternity and chose to earn its transcendence rather than accept it as a gift. Mathematics remain beautiful in their complexity. The sacrifice remains worthwhile in its preservation of choice. And the future remains infinite in its possibility.